Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, and I'm glad that you are here with me today because I'm going to review a movie that was put out by a Christian organization. And this movie is different from so many other Christian movies in the fact that it is very well produced, very well written, and I can tell you that, having seen it just yesterday, that it is gripping, it is riveting. I did not lose interest in an hour and a half during the whole movie, and the movie is called Nefarious. Nefarious. And it deals with the topic of demonic possession and Satan's plan to try to destroy the church and destroy the society that we live in. And this movie was done so well. The quality of this movie is excellent. The actors did an excellent job. There was no point in the movie when I felt, oh, that person is obviously acting, or that was bad acting, or the emotion didn't fit the lines, or it seemed awkward. No, this movie is as good as any movie you're ever going to see as far as the acting and as far as the script writing, as far as the screenplay, as far as the actual getting right down to the details of the quality, cinematography, shooting angles. Just everything was done with excellence, I have to say. And you don't say that to all Christian movies, because sometimes Christian movies have a fantastic storyline, but then they're executed very well. And then other times they're not very well done, produced or directed. And oftentimes the acting suffers because they have Christian actors who are sincere and try and put forth the effort, but they aren't as gifted or they don't have as good a talents as some of the other actors that we see on the big screen. But this movie brings all of those gifts and talents and resources together and is an excellent movie. It's probably, I would say, the best movie pertaining to that topic of exorcism. And you've seen all of these movies, starting, of course, back in the early 70s, I think it was, with The Exorcist, that blockbuster movie that started that whole genre. And pretty much all of the movies that have followed have pretty much copied The Exorcist in the, for example, over-the-top supernatural activity of the demonic, overhyped, over-exaggerated activities of demonic possession and all kinds of things. Sometimes it looks so fake, and looks so much created by what you might say artificial effects, electronic digital effects, and it can make it look fake. But this movie doesn't overdo that. There actually weren't a lot of overly dramatic supernatural aspects of this. It was almost all contained in the dialogue between this prisoner, this murderous prisoner who was possessed by the devil or a demon, and with this psychiatrist who was there to try to figure out whether this person was crazy or not, so that the state of Oklahoma could decide whether they're going to execute him or not. Because if he was mentally insane, then they would have to say, no, we can't execute a mentally insane person. We have to treat him psychiatrically or psychological. So the psychiatrist was brought in, and I won't destroy the whole thing. I won't spoil the whole thing. You just go see the movie. But if you've ever read C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, you'll get an idea about what this movie is about. And what it's about is it's a dialogue. Screwtape Letters is a dialogue between Satan, the chief demon, and these underling demons, these lesser demons. And they're trying to figure out a way to destroy steal, kill, and destroy, as the Bible says. The devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. They're trying to figure out a way to steal, kill, and destroy humanity, how they can destroy individual lives and also society, not just individual lives, but also society. So they're plotting, they're scheming, let's do this, no, let's do that, no, they'll see through that. And it's a strategy to try to tear down, bring down, destroy the human race. Well, this movie too does that, tries to do that. The demon tries to say, hey, we are destroying your society. So for example, one point the psychiatrist says, well, I don't believe things are getting worse. If you look at our society, we're eliminating all kinds of oppression, and we're giving people sexual liberation, and we are giving women the right to choose, and we're giving people the right to decide their gender identity, and on, the psychiatrist says, is a modern secular person. He says he's an atheist. And the prisoner, who is actually demon-possessed, says, oh, okay, you think that's freedom? You think that's liberation? And he goes on and actually encourages that kind of thinking, because that is actually how you destroy society. You tell them that you're liberating them when you're actually enslaving them. And so the dialogue continues. So it's a really interesting plot. I highly recommend someone going to see it. Now, unfortunately, it's very difficult to see this movie right now. It was a low-budget movie produced by a Christian organization or religious organization, and it doesn't have a lot of distribution. And I could see why that it's not going to be able to get a lot of distribution initially, because it deals with topics such as abortion. It takes a pro-life position on abortion, which is not popular in the present culture that we live in. So I can see how there would be every motivation for the big corporations, the movie chains, to actually not distribute this, because it would offend a lot of the leftist, liberal, progressives, organizations that are out there who can put pressure on companies like we see today, and who can boycott companies, and who can force them into basically blacklisting this movie. But it has been out at a few movie theaters here and there, and it is available on streaming platforms today. Unfortunately, you have to pay quite a bit of price to rent this movie. So hopefully that'll come down, and then at some point it'll be available on DVD. But I highly recommend seeing it when it comes out on DVD or when it's on an affordable streaming platform, because this is a masterpiece of showing people how the devil is active in our world today, even though we don't know it, even though we think we're so sophisticated with the secular modern world and with science and all the technologies and smartphones, and we think we're so smart, and yet here the devil is basically running roughshod over our culture, and we don't even perceive that that's what's happening. Now, in looking at the movie theologically, as a Christian leader, I have to say that it follows Orthodox Christian theology very well. I'm always looking at these movies, especially the ones that deal with demonic possession, the devil, demons, that sort of thing. And I always want to see how faithful they're going to stay to Scripture, how faithful they're going to be to the Bible, because after all, that's the standard, right? If we learned one thing from the Reformation period, the Martin Luthers and the John Calvins and the Zwinglies, if we learned anything from that period, we've learned that you have to have the Bible as the standard to judge everything. You can't just simply rely on what you might call church tradition or church historical progress, or you can't rely on some custom that has always been there. That's the error that the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church falls into. They rely on the historical, traditional custom of the church, Well, that can be corrupted by influences that come in the pagan culture. So, and that's actually what has happened throughout the church history. So there needed to be a standard that we can go to and rely on 100% of the time, and not rely on simply this subjective historical evaluation about what, say, for example, the church fathers taught. The church fathers, these early Christian thinkers of the first few centuries, they taught a wide variety of things. So there's not one consensus of the church fathers, but you have to go back to the very source, and that is the early church, and specifically in the writings of the New Testament and the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the foundation, and then the New Testament is the church is built on the teachings of the apostles and the prophets, and of course, Jesus Christ. So that's all condensed in the New Testament. So you have to have the Old Testament as the foundation, and then the church building itself is the New Testament. And you go back to these sources, and these are the sources where we judge what is right and wrong and true and false. And I look at all of these movies from that filter, and lo and behold, this movie is definitely one that passes the theological test. It doesn't stray into heresy. It doesn't stray into heterodoxy. It doesn't stray into apostasy. It isn't teaching false doctrine or some new age thing. Some of these exorcist movies or demonic possession movies actually go into false teachings. For example, there was a movie that I did a review on called The Pope's Exorcist. This is only a few months ago I reviewed this. And again, they do the same theologically sketchy and problematic concept of the exorcist getting to the point in an exorcism where he's so frustrated, nothing seems to be working, so he invites the devil into himself as the exorcist. Okay, that is totally false teaching. There is nothing in the Bible that demonstrates that a Christian should ever invite the demon into himself, and there's no teaching in the New Testament that says that this is permissible. The only approach that we have with possession is to come at the demon through the name of Jesus Christ and cast it out completely. So there's none of this, devil come into the exorcist theology. That is pure fiction. That is pure Hollywood. And they did it in the original Exorcist movie back in 1973, I think it was. And so many of the other movies that have come in the decades after that, they follow that same worn out, tired, muddled script of having the demon try to go into the exorcist. This is false teaching, and I've called it out before, but this movie doesn't do that. It doesn't try to bring the demon out of the possessed person by calling the demon into the exorcist as a solution, because that is contrary to all the teachings of the New Testament. Jesus never did that. The apostles, of course, never did that, and we are not to do that today. So this movie doesn't follow that, and that's great, because finally we have a movie dealing with the subject of possession that doesn't bring in these Hollywood theatrics and these repetitive scripts that are not biblical. And now there is a point where the psychiatrist is challenged because he doesn't believe in demon possession. There is a point where the demon, through this prisoner, says, well, if you don't believe in me, why don't you invite me into you? Okay, so this is an atheist. He says, why would I do that? I don't even believe in you. And the prisoner says, well, then if you don't believe in me and you don't believe possession is real, what harm would there be? And so that's the closest to that error of the original Exorcist that it gets. And it doesn't really materially affect the movie and the point of the movie. So I'm glad to see that this movie actually is theologically sound and solid. There's nothing that biblically is erroneous or problematic. Now, I'm not saying that everything that the demon-possessed person says theologically or everything that he uses to explain, for example, the fall of Satan and the demons is actually 100% accurate. If there are some kind of errors, and there probably are in some of the explanations that he gives, but they aren't major, and they don't affect anything major in as far as theology and doctrine in Christianity. So I would have to give it a thumbs up as far as theologically accurate. It doesn't try to give the devil too much credit, but then it does show the power and influence of demons in the world today. And it does so in a number of clever ways. One, it talks about abortion. And the devil, or the demon inside of this possessed man, actually talks about abortion in biblically accurate ways. He says it's a modern form of Moloch worship, which was an ancient pagan practice where the people would come and sacrifice their children in this fiery altar to Moloch, the pagan god. And he says that's what we did back then, and now we do it through abortion. You sacrifice your child in the fires of the incinerator after the abortion is done, and you kill your child for the same reasons as the other Moloch worshipers would do. And now, as Christians, we've already known that for years and years. I've taught that. I've given sermons about how modern-day abortion is like Moloch worship, where the people would sacrifice their children for the things that they wanted in life, whether it's a healthy crop in the fall that comes in or whatever. And here again, right out of the lips of this demon-possessed prisoner, he's talking in terms of how the demons use abortion to destroy human beings. And that's the goal. That's the goal. The demon claims. He says, the goal is to destroy you. We're trying to get at God through you. And if we can destroy God's creation, the image of God in you, we can hurt or punish God. And he talked about rebellion. He talked in terms of at the original creation, God created everyone, all the angels, the angelic beings, and that he expected them to follow his will. And some of the angels, demons, and the devil himself resented the fact that they had to follow this higher authority, and they wanted to do their own thing. They wanted to be free, and they saw that living in God's kingdom with God's rules and God's will, they saw that as slavery. They saw that as bondage. The only freedom that they would accept was the freedom to do anything they wanted to and have no higher authority over them. And so that's how the angelic realm fell. A third of them became demons and were banished by God from heaven because they would not submit to the will of God. They wanted to be their own gods. And so this possessed prisoner is trying to explain to the psychiatrist, that is how we're trying to convince humans to rebel against God, is to reject his laws and commands and the will of God and see them as slavery and oppressive and rebel and create the same scenario that happened in heaven with the demonic angels. They want to foment revolution and resistance against God on earth. So very interesting, good theology, and I hope a lot of people get to see this movie. My hope is that some of the larger distributors of movies across the country and the world see this and how well it's done and how well it's produced and the acting is good, and they see the success of its limited showings in the limited theaters that it's shown. They see how well it's done and say, hey, we can make a lot of money on this, and actually pick it up and give it wide distribution into essentially all the theaters, and millions of people see it. So hopefully that is what will happen, because people need to see this movie because it gives a lot of good teaching about the devil, demons, the purpose and point of the satanic revolt against God and what they're trying to do on earth as far as turn us as humans against God and cause us to rebel further and further away from the will of God. And the demon goes on and talks in terms of what's happening in society today, the gender confusion, and all kinds of falling away from morality and the moral principles, and the chaos that ensues. And it's all there. It's all what we have been saying for about a decade or two, or over a decade, about how Christianity is under attack, and it actually is under attack. Yet it's hard to convince people about that who aren't thinking through the lens of spiritual warfare. As if you read the Bible, if you're a Christian and you read the Bible, it says there are principalities and powers, and we war not against flesh and blood, but in the realm of spirit. And our battle is not purely on the material, physical level, but it's also in the spiritual realm. And that's why we have to approach it simply not through politics alone or finances alone, but we have to fight it through prayer and beating back evil through moral good, and so on and so forth. We've been saying this for decades, and we've been analyzing the culture as declining morally and spiritually for decades. And this movie helps people who haven't been a part of that conversation, who aren't up on all of that, to say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Our culture, our spiritual Judeo-Christian worldview, foundation, heritage is under attack, definitely. And so this movie does a lot good in spreading some actual good theology here. And that's why I really do recommend people seeing this movie. And it is, it's not overly hyped in the sense of a lot of the exorcist and demonic possession movies are so full of the fantastical supernatural that people can step back and go, oh boy, this is Hollywood again, trying to make it dramatic and trying to, when you look at the original Exorcist movie back there, you had the demon-possessed girl, Linda Blair. Her head spun all the way around, and that's supposed to be, some kind of a demonic trick. And people see that and they go, yeah, that's not believable. How do you spin someone's head all the way around without breaking their neck? Well, that's a good question. And it's actually physically impossible to spin a person's head all the way around. So a lot of these movies, demon possession movies and exorcist movies and devil movies, they throw in a lot of those theatrical tricks that really lose credibility to the underlying message. Now, The Exorcist, the original Exorcist, is basically describing, well, the whole story is more or less a compilation of a lot of different exorcists that have taken place over the years. And the writers and producers actually threw all of those together into one person. So you have the worst of everything that's ever occurred in the history of exorcism in one person's possession case. And so they felt they had to do that, I guess, Hollywood, over the top drama. But what they also did was they isolated, I think, and separated people's credibility from what they were seeing by throwing in all of these far-fetched things like the head spinning and some of the more absurd things just for shock value. And people could walk away going, well, boy, I'm glad that that stuff doesn't happen. Clearly, that's impossible, and we don't have to worry about it. Well, no, the actual reality of possession is real. And so you don't want to alienate people or push them into cynicism because of some cheap, theatrical tricks that turn them off, and let them escape from the reality that there are real people with real possession. And I think a good book to read about is one by Malachi Martin called, I think it's called Possessed by the Devil or something like that. And it's basically a chronicle of 5 exorcisms, I think it is. Very well documented, and you get a reality of, hey, this is real. And there are real people that really get possessed. This is a real problem. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, and it's not something that we have to worry about in our everyday life, running into somebody who's demon-possessed and whatnot. But it does happen, and we have to be aware of it, and we have to be ready in case we encounter evil and demonic. And there's a lot to learn on that subject, and I've tried to educate myself over the years, especially as a Christian leader. I've tried to educate myself, would I be able to deal with a person who is demon-possessed? I've actually run into 1 or 2 or 3 instances where I really felt that a person was demonically possessed. They did possess all of the attributes, characteristics. Now, an easy escape is, well, they're just crazy. They're just mentally ill. But when you start looking deeper into some of these cases, it's not just a matter of they're just wacko and they need psychiatric help or some kind of psychiatric medication. No, there are people who actually are possessed of the devil or obsessed or bothered, or what they might call demonically infested by demons that need spiritual exorcism. And Protestants generally have been a little bit reticent to admit that, and Roman Catholics have the tradition of being the only ones that can actually deal with demons through the rite of exorcism, but that's not true. Any Christian leader especially should be equipped to grab the Bible and quote scripture and tell the demons to leave and carry out an exorcism. So this movie is not over the top, dramatic, is very theologically sound. It's very believable, very convincing, well produced, well written, well scripted, and I highly recommend seeing it if you can get a chance to see it, because it actually does describe a real phenomenon that takes place in this world today. Hope that's been helpful. We'll see you back next week. God bless.